Hey, but to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today I have another special recreation versus reimagining comparison for you, of course, between these two amazing Seiko divers. A little bit about the brand. They were founded back in 1881. They're Japanese in origin and factories throughout Asia. They cover all market segments from entry level to high end, and this is a great comparison within that spectrum in terms of being a more entry level dive watch, and then of course all the way up. And also, you know, hey, both ISO compliant in terms of one being for 200 meters divers and the other being for a saturation diver. Now, the interesting bond between these two watches is that they're actually both inspired by the original 1968 6159 diver, which was Seiko's first professional diver and also their first high beat diver. And essentially, you know, that watch actually set the grounds for what would eventually become Seiko's signature design aesthetic, at least within their diver lines, by having that 4 o'clock crown being set, as well as the split indice at the 12 o'clock. So these are all things that now are quite synonymous with Seiko, but in the past really weren't. And when you look back, as much as I love the 62 MAS and of course all the reiterations that came later on, that watch is definitely more of just a traditional skin diver, right, of the time. And there's a lot of watches that will look similar by comparison, whereas these particular watches definitely have a very signature Seiko design aesthetic, which I can really appreciate. Now, of course, these are dive watches. Some key characteristics in design when you're looking for a diver: you want water resistance, typically some type of screw down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelets. We're comparing the Seiko Prospex SLA039 and the Seiko Prospex SPB187. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, so if you don't already know, some of the main things that separate these two watches are going to be the price point and, of course, the market segment. So price points on the SLA model, these actually retail for $6,800, so $6,800 MSRP, but of course can be found various prices pre-owned. In this case, this one was for around $3,000 on eBay, whereas this model here is going to be an MSRP of $1,200, and you can get these new from Sakura for about $851. So great pricing, and really, they're, you know, this is a limited edition here. This is going to be a 55th anniversary 1100 piece limited edition, so 1,100, and then we have a standard production model in terms of the reinterpretation, right? And you can still get this, and then these ones are, actually there are still some new that are available, right? But I think they're well, the interesting thing is although they share that common ancestry, they really take two very different approaches in terms of their execution. Of course, one being a lot more high end, and then one being more down to earth. But with that, I mean, they're both very nice within their segment and both very strong offerings within their segment. So another thing where they differ is, I feel really the SPB tries to be more of an everyday, very versatile piece. So it does certain things that make it a bit more wearable and more kind of daily drivable, whereas the SLA is fine being a bit more eccentric and a bit more signature because of that, right? So there's going to be more personality there. It's not going to be, I would say, as versatile again, but there's definitely a lot more punch and a lot more depth and just you know, a deeper connection with design here versus here. You know, as much as I love it and as great as I think it turned out, I can definitely see that there are certain choices that were made specifically to make it just more of an everyday wearable piece, which for some folks that's what they're looking for, while others might be looking for something very special. So there's definitely a difference there, and it's not just because because one is using ever brilliant steel, one is using 316 steel. You know, it's not quite as objective in terms of, you know, what makes one, you know, nicer or more expensive than the other. Some might find this to be the nicer watch for them, and some might find this to be the nicer watch for them, right? And some might like neither of these watches and might be fine with something much cheaper, or find both of these to be cheap and would only settle for something a lot more expensive. So just to kind of get that little intro out of the way, so let's go ahead and just compare straight up. Like, let's look at the sizes. So 44.5 millimeters in diameter versus 42 millimeter. So the interesting thing is, as you look at these, some of you might not see that much of an actual difference in terms of the diameter, and a lot of that has to do with just the dial spacing, as well as the actual the difference in just the what's the word I'm looking for, the ratios, I guess that's not the right word, but in terms of the, wow, I'm feeling a little vulnerable right now. I'm stuck on a word. The proportions. There we go. Because of the proportions of those dial to bezel ratios and the way that the dials are spaced out or less spaced, I would say can really give you a different impression in terms of how these actually wear. But of course, you know, in reality, they're not too different when you just look at them straight on. I think you could tell there's a bit more depth here, which is probably because, yes, it's a bit taller. When we take a look here, and the nice thing is they both, of course, do have sapphire crystals with AR coating. They both have lacquered bezels there, and they both have shielded loom pips at 12 o'clock. And then you're going to see here is a big difference, right? Again, this is a design aspect where you're getting the original, you know, monoblock construction there, singular piece, no open case back, versus here it's, you know, essentially a more traditional mid case back bezel. Here you're just getting the case and then the bezel on top. Everything is going to be front loaded into that, and you can see here much different. But I will say that on the wrist, a lot of the SLA will melt away because of that high polish, as well as you can see those family you know, differences in terms, I should say similarities, in terms of that undercut, which is going to be reflecting right off of the wrist and sinking into the wrist. Of course, there's going to be a little bit more on this case that's going to sink in because it is flat, versus here it does protrude. So you can see that's a very big difference, and this really helps with wearability and visually making it appear much thinner. And then you also do have an extra contour in the center there, and that center line where you're getting the brushing to offset that. Here it's going to be more about that knife edge there on kind of both sides, and it is very, very nice. But you know, hey, here there's an extra level of complexity, although not finished quite to as high a standard. Also, the ever brilliant steel is going to appear a bit whiter in terms of the material and brighter, versus the 316, which is going to be a little bit darker. And then you also add to that the fact that this is coated with Seiko's hard coating known as Dia Shield. It's going to give it an even slightly darker tint, and I don't know if that's going to even be picked up on camera. Maybe in terms of the brushing, you can kind of see. If you take a look at the horns on the lugs, check out one, look how bright that's reflecting back. And then this one, you know, not quite. And then even the brushing going in a different direction there, you can see one being the circular and then one being vertical. So you can hopefully be able to tell a slight difference there in the kind of character in terms of the materials for the actual, you know, for the cases there. And I did decide to share these with you guys off of strap, just so they'd be a little bit, you know, unbothered, because one comes on a bracelet, one comes on a rubber strap. I actually have this one. I typically wear it on an Artem sailcloth strap, just for more of a secure and kind of complete feel. Versus, you know, on the bracelet, I'm definitely more of a bracelet guy. If this watch had a bracelet, I think that would be amazing. But then at the same time, because of the thickness, it would probably have to be, you know, quite bulky, just to kind of offset the size of the case itself. But you guys can see, let's go ahead and compare now the bezel turn here. Very nice, great grip. Check this out, if I can get it to focus there. Very nice coin edge bezel, especially at this price point. Nice and audible, very, very smooth, still having those tactile clicks. Very nice. So that is nice. But when you get over here, ooh. Ultra smooth by comparison. Maybe too smooth, because the clicking is a lot less audible, and the tactile feeling in your finger when you do it is a little less noticeable because it is very smooth. And some people, you know, they prefer a smoother bezel action, and some people prefer a more tactile clicky bezel, and there's no kind of right or wrong answer to that. In terms of, for my personal preference, I do prefer kind of the sweeter spot here, where this is smooth but has the clickiness, versus here it is so smooth you can almost you know, the clicks are almost just dampened to where you can't feel them quite as much. But another thing with the bezels are the inserts. Check this out. This one has more of a lasered finish for that bezel insert, you can see, whereas this is going to be more of an engraved finish. And you can see there a little bit more depth on the bezel versus a little bit flatter looking on the bezel. Then you got a little bit more depth on the dial. Check out how high these indices are, and they have the older style of Loom application where there's a slight recess within the indice, and then that is filled with Loom, whereas here it's more of a pad of Loom on top of a flat indice. Also, you're not going to get a framed date, whereas here you're getting a framed date. Oh, also probably huge to mention, movement wise, you're getting a high beat caliber, which is going to be 5 hertz, or it's going to be beating at 10 ticks per second, versus a low beat caliber, which is going to be 3 hertz or ticking at 6 ticks per second. So you know, that's huge in terms of the price point and the audience. And you can see that one is moving slightly you know, smoother than the other in terms of those ticks. If you just want to just focus in on those items. And then when you look at the handset, again, more true to the original versus more of a reimagining, more about kind of balance, right? Probably the economies of scale as well, because these handsets and the, you know, even the seconds hand you're going to see on other Seiko divers, whereas this set was made specifically for this model. And you can see here you're just going to get kind of a dual finish brush with a polish, and then here you're actually going to get a fully contoured finish there, where you're going to get bevels. You're going to get a flat top with sharp beveled edges. If I can get the camera to take, there we go. So very, very high end in execution. Also, you can see that the flats on these indices do have also micro contours to them, which are going to catch the light and sometimes give it a bit of an iridescent kind of rainbow effect to it, whereas it's going to be more of a standard high polished affair here in terms of those indice surrounds. Also, the blues are slightly different, as you can see there. Neither of them have signed crowns, but neither of the originals had signed crowns either. And when I say neither, there were essentially 2 iterations of the original 6159. One of them was before the high beat movement, one of them was after, and you know, added the split indice. So that's the one that we're really taking inspiration from. And many of you may know this as just, you know, a Marine Master 200 reduced, right? And the Marine Master was actually the first kind of popular reimagining of this, you know, the watch that inspired this one. And it created kind of its own success and spawned other variations to include, they've even released newer GMT models that are in this kind of more Marine Master reduced style. So again, hugely influential in terms of this, you know, the watch that inspired the SLA, to still be creating variants and offshoots today is huge. I think that's really awesome. And there was even tons of watches that took inspiration and variation years ago that were probably a little bit less true to form, because they were just more so meant to be, you know, updates. Whereas now we're, you know, really big into the whole reissue game, and you know, it's nice to get a little bit more of a true recreation of those original pieces that are so desirable today. So with that said, we're not going to do on the wrist. If you guys want to see these on the wrist, definitely check out those full video reviews, but we'll go ahead and do a Loom comparison. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. All right, so as you can see, these both have amazing Loom, and the camera might even try to offset it a little bit. To my naked eye, I can see that the SLA definitely has a deeper glow. It might be just the, you know, some of you might just write that off as well. They're larger pips, but it's also the deeper application and the thicker application. There's just more layers there, which is not only going to help with initial brightness, but also longevity. Initial brightness is going to be more so based off of, you know, the surface area. Right, one has a bigger pip, one has a smaller pip, so one is going to glow less, right? And that's kind of all she wrote. But I will say that the SPB does a great job. It's by no means lacking in Loom. You compare this to many other, you know, let's say Swiss counterparts, and you would be like blown away and say that this Loom is fantastic. It's just when you compare it to something, of course, of this stature, you know, with just that other application style, it's definitely going to render, you know, just a little bit weaker by comparison. But one thing I always like to work in, of course, is a bit of low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or maybe just spending some time in your favorite automobile. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to maybe even include some harsh lighting that typically could expose any type of production defects. But all you're going to see here is just, you know, signature Seiko, in terms of just how beautiful these are. The luster and the reflection on the high polish, the beautiful uniform nature of the way the light is going to glide off of the brushing on those case surfaces. Very, very nice. But here's some things to notice. When in mixed lighting conditions, check that out. That 3D engraved nature of the SPB makes their bezel a lot more readable. Check that out. So even in lower light conditions, and let's switch it to this side. And yeah, you can, with a little bit more light, of course, you can expose that more. There's going to be something to glimmer, but it's not going to be quite as obvious. Check that out. So this is going to be, in terms of low light, even though you're going to get brighter Loom, in terms of that bezel, you know, hey, that's a modern practice, and that is something that is really, really helping with legibility now. Another thing, as you can see, let's look at the way the indices capture the light. Look at the way on the SLA that those micro you know, machined lines look. See the way they capture the light and just reflect it straight back at you. You don't get that with the regular polished variations. Check that out. They're just going to reflect. The light's just going to kind of roll around it, versus capturing it and sending it right back at you. So very, very cool effect to see that just boom right there at the 12 o'clock, versus here you're going to see it mostly because the Loom that's on top, right, that contrast against the dark dial versus the actual surrounds. The surrounds themselves are more so just kind of disappearing, and they're more for kind of just the daylight look, right? And it looks really, really nice, but in darkness they tend to kind of disappear. So very, very cool, guys. I'm a big fan, and you can see already the way that one is faded versus the other. Still glowing, and you know, again, to my naked eye, probably not as dramatic as it's going to be here on camera, because you know the camera is going to do its best to kind of balance things out. But look at that ever brilliant steel coming off the lug there. It just has such a beautiful, bright luster. And again, ever brilliant steel, if you don't know about it, it's actually used in deep sea equipment. It's harder than standard stainless steel, and it's brighter, as well as being more corrosion resistant. Now, the benefit, though, of a 316 is that, of course, it's more abundant and it's going to be cheaper. So that's nice, right? And if something happens to the watch, it's going to be easier for you to repair it. Although with that DiaShield coating, not quite as easy, because if you have to buff or polish something out, now that finish off of the top is going to be gone as well. Whereas on that ever brilliant steel being uncoated, you can just buff it out. Of course, it's going to be a little bit harder to buff because it is a bit of a harder material, but man, these low light transitions, I could do these all day. Look at the difference in their dials, where the SPB is going to be more contrasting dial, where it's going to be black with that vibrant, almost indigo blue streak through it. Whereas the, I'd say the less dynamic SLA, where it's going to be almost a 50-50 split on the way that that band comes through. It's a lot wider, less contrasting, feels more like a midnight bluish gray, which is even how Seiko actually describes this blue, as being more of a blue gray, right? So you're not going to see hints of black, you're going to see more hints of gray with blue. And some of you might like that, some of you might prefer the other way. But with that, let's go ahead and get into some closing thoughts, guys. I love both of these watches in terms of, you know, what they offer, and come on with the dust. I love them both, and it's one of those things where I think for an everyday, for more of a 1-watch to 3-watch collection, you're probably going to prefer the Marine Master 200 in terms of its versatility and wearability. But then when you have, I'd say, a more distinctive collection, maybe you've been collecting a little bit longer, you're more into that quirkiness, more into, what makes something very unique. I think that's really, and then of course, if you have the wrist to pull it off, where I think that SLA model is really going to speak to you. I think in terms of the price point, a lot of folks are going to just say, oh man, that's too expensive for a Seiko. It's not a Grand Seiko. But I will say this Seiko diver, for me, is going to be more attractive than any Grand Seiko diver, apart from maybe their new Evolution 9 dive series that recently released, which I think is actually very nice. But in terms of like classic nature, timelessness, this is going to age well because it's already aged well. So that's just something to consider. Also, again, when you think about things within this price point, you can get them used for a lot less, right? So they're going to be more accessible versus if you were to buy something new. So that's also something to consider when you are looking at these. So I think for me, of course, within my core collection, I love the SLA because I also have an SLA017 to kind of balance that out. And I have my Grand Seikos on the other side in terms of being very wearable, even my King Seiko dedicated dress watch, and even I have another watch that is similar in terms of its thickness, but it's a chronograph, right? My Panda Seiko. So in terms of where it fits within my core collection, this is an excellent fit for it. But I could see a lot of folks not, I would say it's either going to be people that have certain pieces that offset and can help balance some of the eccentricities of the SLA are going to really enjoy it. Some of you are just big dive watch collectors and you're going to love this piece, right? But for those of you that are looking for more of a standard collection, something that's going to be more wearable, ultimately, where each watch almost feels like it can be a one watch, I think that's where the SPB is just such a great fit, and I think competes very, very well against its Swiss and German counterparts. But with that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.